Hey everyone, welcome back to Reality 2.0. This week, Doc Searles, Petros Katoupas, and Kyle Rankin again are joining me, Catherine Druckman, for a little chat about what's been going on in the privacy and digital world in the past week. There's always something, right? There's always something to talk about, sadly.
Yeah.
Who's making headlines? But we thought we'd cover a few bases today, and among them,
we've been covering them some already. I was just wondering. I mean, we could pull this together. You always have a puzzle to reassemble at the end of these things.
I do. Takes me a week, but hey. So next Friday, when you're hearing this, know that I've been piecing it together for the past week. But so there's a lot going on. So we talk about the title of the podcast a lot, and we sort of joke about reality, our new reality, and I mean, it's not all bad, right? It's not all bleak. We get to hang out with each other virtually all the time, so that's good. But yeah, there's a lot to talk about.
I'll tell you, I can't name names, but I've been talking to at least one publication that is feeling big guilt about being in the advertising business. It is on its way out. I mean, as the spying-based advertising business anyway, it's on its way out. Advertising itself is going to be fine, but the kind that follows you around is going to be killed. And then, and now I'm looking at, we talked about this on one of our back channels, but Augustin Fu and has this amazing way to visualize all of the cascading, who gets a cookie, who gets the data, graphic, and the markup, which is this very principled publication, has a new thing called blacklight that kind of, in the same way as a blacklight will light up something that's got smudge on it or whatever, and that'll tell you what's wrong with any particular site in terms of spying on people.
I think blacklight is actually really well done because it doesn't just most of these privacy tools, they alert you to the presence of various cookies and tracking and whatnot. But I think Blacklist does a really nice job of explaining the significance of each, which I think is important because if people don't understand the difference between, I don't know, a New Relic performance related tracker versus, a Hotjar that's, tracking your mouse movements and stuff like that. I think they're more likely to clue themselves into the significance, which is, half of the battle.
Yeah, somebody needs to, and it's something I would gladly write. I think there needs to be a book about this. Don Marty, who was one of our ex-editors, editors-in-chief, pointed out that if you're writing about ad tech, it's kind of like painting the Golden Gate Bridge. By the time you're done at one end, the other end is already old paint. So you never can't paint the whole thing at once. That said, though, I think a lot of the practices are pretty consistent. Across the retargeting has been around for a while. The way this system is kind of built is there. So I just ran Linux Journal through it. It says no.
So back when we did the rebuild of, as long as they're using,
as long as they don't change that,
so we worked with a guy named Chris Ripple, who is awesome. And the two of us came up with a bunch of solutions for respecting user initiation. So it doesn't load, like, while we, unfortunately, I would say, had to rely on Disqus for comments, we didn't load it unless the user specifically asked. So unless you load the comments, you're not getting any of the Disqus tracking stuff. The same, we tried to sort of, wall off YouTube a little bit too. So yes, we were still using YouTube videos just for, ease of use, really, because again, we were a small crew, and the less we had to maintain, the better. But we used it, but we used the no cookie domain, and we were only loading images unless the user specifically interacted with that bit. We didn't load anything at all, any YouTube content, or So, we tried our best, I think,
I think we succeeded. I think we did a great job. You did a great job. You did a great job. It was a great thing.
You did a phenomenal job, especially when you
Yeah.
consider what it used to be.
Yes, full of tracking.
No, just even layout. I'm serious.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Clean, crisp,
Got better over the year.
easy to navigate. Yes, it was phenomenal. You did a great job.
Right. But the point of all of that is, for now anyway,
Yeah.
as long as nothing changes, you should get a pretty clean bill of health, so to speak, when you run it through.
Yeah.
One of those.
Well, I just got one. I
tracking-
just ran one through and it's got nothing. So
yeah. So
that's,
let's hope that sticks around.
yeah.
We'll see.
Um,
It's a legacy.
legacy. Everything over 2 minutes old is legacy at this point, I think.
Oh, that's fair.
There is only
A little
now
depressing.
and a few things we remember given short-term memory.
So speaking of now, I thought we might get around
Yeah.
to the topic that everyone seems to be talking about, which is the Amazon Amazon April Fool's joke that's in fact a product.
Yeah, right.
You know, when I first saw it, I was like,
September
"Oh, this is a
Fool's
joke, right?" No, it's totally not a joke. I went to the Amazon site and I went to the post about, you know, I guess they had a major event. I feel like I'm a little uninformed right now, but they must do a thing like Apple does and like every big company where they announce all of their new product lineup and they announced this thing. But in retrospect, that, you know, I look at it and I really thought it was a joke. I mean, it's not that it's so much more inherently evil than a lot of other things. It's just it's a flying camera that flies around your house. I wonder to what y'all.
Yeah, it's a drone. I wonder how it sounds. That's the first thing I thought, is that
it must sound like any other drone. I mean, I guess, yeah, this caught me by surprise. Ring with a drone intended to fly around your house. I mean,
I laugh.
So it's got a camera on it. You use your phone as a remote control. Like, does it alert you like there's a noise or movement present, and then you can just fly the drone to where in your house?
Well, I think yes, you can do that, but it's also it's autonomous. I mean, it makes those decisions for itself, as I understand it. It will inspect areas of randomly inspect areas of your house based on determination it makes for itself.
It's like things out of a video game. You know, you're trying to sneak around and you're trying to avoid like these flying, like cyborg or drone-like robots that are protecting some sort of fortress. Or I mean, that's sort of what it reminds me of.
And there's a little tiny bit of like a military drone thing going on too. You're like, is it going to shoot at me? I don't know. It's just, I don't know. I wish I could be a little bit more serious right now, but the object itself is so comical to me that I find it really hard to take seriously. But yet that's the point of this conversation. We should, in fact, you know, take it seriously.
I just made this interesting discovery.
Sorry, Kyle. I think you were about to say something, and I keep interrupting.
I was just going to say, I think one of the other things to keep in mind, especially with technologies like Ring, is another thing they announced was a landlord version of Ring that landlords could use to virtually drop in on tenants. And there's a lot of this sort of home security type stuff that, you know, on one hand, you have one perspective on it when you think about it in terms of, well, I'm doing this for myself or my neighborhood, and it's a completely different thing when you realize that in many cases it's something that either a landlord or a hotel or, you know, other places are instituting where it's not an opt-in, you know, unless you choose either to not rent or you cancel your lease for the landlord who implements this. But I could see, for example, combined with the landlord system, a landlord, you know, launching to fly the Valkyrie's drone for a drop-in visit, you know.
That's disturbing. So yeah, actually, so the Amazon landlord thing is what we talked about 2 episodes ago, because that was it, and that's the thing. I mean, they had just announced this landlord program, and we talked about how just bizarre that was, and we had this sort of like ha, you know, who thought that was a good idea conversation, and then just a couple of weeks later, with, you know, they come out with a flying drone.
It looks like a video game. That's what it looks like.
A video game. It looks like an episode of Alias from years ago, where they were outrunning this tiny mini helicopter that was shooting at them. This is immediately what I thought, and I don't know. It just looked to me like like it was a kind of a joke prototype that accidentally made it into production. And suddenly they're like, oh God, we've got to create a whole marketing campaign around this thing. But I could be wrong, obviously.
I wonder if I mean, I think it'd be really cool if, Jeff Bezos presented this and he's levitating the whole time, or something like that. I'm looking at it now and I'm thinking, okay, it'll probably dodge somebody who comes after it, right? If you want to swat it out of the air. Then I thought, is it going to outrun a bullet? I don't know if somebody wants to shoot one of these things.
Well,
Probably not. I'm guessing. It's
well, I mean, it's going to end up doing its primary goal, which is how they're advertising it, right? Home security. It's going to capture pictures of anybody trying to break in. But that aside, I mean, you have the other end of it. I mean, it's mapping your home, right? It's
here, you want to know something
scanning
weird.
Your house
Yeah.
at all times.
So we're in a borrowed house here. I mean, we're at a friend's house. It's a big house though, and she's under care, and there's a caretaker in that room, but they have security cameras around there's one at the front door, there's one in the backyard by the pool, and there's one in the side where all the garbage cans are. And I find myself sitting, I put some chairs outside where they don't look because I don't want to be on camera, right? And I'm thinking, why would somebody want, I mean, it seems to be the downside of having the fully observed house exceed where something's watching you, even if it's your own damned house, right? It's kind of the same problem I have with Alexa being on all the time, listening to me. It's like, what are they doing? I mean, I don't want it listening all the time. I'd rather, make a clap or something and have it wake up and then talk to it or something. But, I mean, we don't have an Alexa, but we have friends that do, and they're all of them are saying, would be sure not to use the A word. What's the A word? Because it's gonna talk back to you.
Except that it's listening. I mean, in order to hear
exactly, it's
the
listening at all
word,
times. And what's happening on the other end, right? And
actually, one of my kids were out playing, and my wife and I were sitting on our driveway with our neighbors the other day, and there was a couple of teenage girls that rode past with their bikes, and the one of them called out to the other one, "Hey, Alexa," and started saying whatever she was saying. And my wife and I and our neighbors said, how unfortunate that her name is
right,
Alexa.
That is actually her name. Yeah. Or if her name is Alex, right, or something that's similar enough. Will Alexa wake up if you just say Alex?
I have no idea.
I
don't own one. Our neighbors do, so maybe I should ask.
I mean, you can change it to Echo or computer, or I can't remember the rest. But
right, yeah, I know. Yeah, you can do that. Yeah, you should change the name to Lerfensturtle or something like that.
I don't think you can customize it.
Yeah, you can. Oh, that'd be kind of cool. Huh. Well, here's an almost interesting thing. Until about a minute ago, when I went to look up Alexa, the Alexa drone, everything was in the UK. And then I realized I had a VPN on, and I didn't know it. I'd forgotten it. I'd forgotten that I was trying out a VPN. So, but it worked pretty well. I guess it testifies to the value
to
of
an
that
extent.
VPN.
Was the VPN so you can stream TikTok?
No, it was actually that would have been a more fun purpose. No, it was actually so I could see what's happening in the UK. I wanted the UK view of something, and that was like yesterday. I just forgotten about it.
That's an interesting point that you say. I wanted the UK view of something, and that is really that is interesting. The way that, I mean, the way that information is so targeted that you really you have to put on a little costume in order to get different perspectives, and I think that's worth talking about.
Yeah, what is the actual name for that? I mean, it's not. I know I could do an IP lookup, but when the server auto detects, just looks at your IP address and looks it up against the table and sees where you're from. What is that called within the server with that system? It's
called Mac.
Basically, it's location. It detects location, but here in California, because of the CCPA, if one detects a California IP address, which in my case at this location is a 107 address, that's Los Angeles, and it says, and you get this thing, you should try VPNing to California and seeing what you see, because you get this thing saying, if you don't want us to sell your information, you have to fill out a form, or you have to do some other thing, and it's very aversive and confusing, and that's because of the CCPA, the California Consumer Privacy Act, for which there is a new proposition. We have that direct democracy here, a proposition where you can, it just puts more teeth in that law, which the EFF doesn't like, and I don't like it either, but we don't have to go into it. I didn't like the CCPA either. I think it was a bad idea.
Well, but, overcomplicating things.
Thinks that more laws help. Often, they protect yesterday from last Thursday, and they last for years, and then people think of time inside that frame and goes on.
Let's check in with Kyle. Well, okay, so we're talking about a few things, but in particular, I wondered about your perspective on this Amazon drone, specifically. Just so when we talk about these things that keep popping up every couple of weeks, I like to talk about unforeseen consequences. I don't think the geeks in in development and R&D or in the back room trying to destroy the world or do something nefarious with this technology. I truly don't believe that. But I think inevitably there are unforeseen consequences. And for example, I brought up offline earlier, or online, but not here, the concern that popped up a few years ago about Roomba potentially basically like selling maps of people's houses, and then Roomba kind of, I think, backpedaled a bit and put up some privacy policy that, I don't know. I'm not actually. I believe they've committed to not selling to third parties, but I'm not sure. I can't say for sure. But I just wondered, about your thoughts about the unforeseen consequences of this type of device. I mean, what concerns you the most, or even the least about that kind of device?
Well, so one of my concerns is what it normalizes. So if you have now this handy little helicopter flying around your house recording things on patrol, just like you have a robot that's cleaning your floor, you start becoming accustomed to it being there, just like everyone now is in many cases accustomed to having a smart speaker in their house or in their friend's house listening to what's going on. And it very quickly, the implications of those things change if it's normalized to the point that now you have one maybe that's patrolling outside of your house. Just like you have a Ring camera aiming out into your street. And if you have one that now can fly outside of your house, it's maybe bigger, it launches from the garage and patrols your property, then, and that's kind of normalized. And then it makes it very easy for you to have, some sort of municipal drone that flies around, kind of dystopian future kinds of stuff. But it just sort of slinks over to that area where if you're used to it at that point, because it's not that it's not that different from my own cameras that I use. We found that in San Francisco recently, where there was this community camera police watch type thing. It wasn't for the police to use; it was for community watch cameras that were installed, and they found that during recent BLM protests that the police were able to commandeer that equipment and get the footage from it, even though it wasn't intended for that.
Yeah, the current political unrest, I think, always generally adds a new layer to concern about these kind of things.
Yeah, well, and combine it with facial recognition. Imagine not only do you have the drone that's flying out and looking around your house, or maybe now looking out into your yard, but it also, even though they've said in the past that they are not at this moment going to link this sort of thing with their facial recognition database. That's just a policy decision away. Just like Google was never going to link DoubleClick's information with their other properties until they did. And then when they did, all of these connections were made. And the same thing goes here. If you have cameras pointing out of your door and you have a drone that's flying around your house on patrol, and you can identify the people that are around, that there's an extra level of implication. I mean, there's just that combined with all of the other sensors that you have paints a deeper and more complete picture of everyone. You know, your heart rate when on your watch, integrated with some camera that might be looking at your face, picking up cues that tell the story about your emotion, that when combined with your heart rate can tell whether you were lying to the other person in the room that you were talking to at that particular moment, things like that.
Yeah, so there have been a few news articles recently about facial recognition technology that's designed to assign a trust score basically to your facial features and expressions. And it's, and there are major concerns about this because, there are implications of racism and more than just that. I mean, I have a hard time actually even putting it into words, but it's disturbing, the idea that you could be profiled based on your bone structure. And then there was an article in Vice saying that Department of Homeland Security said that their facial recognition photos have been hacked. So I don't know, there are so many things to be concerned about when you talk about facial recognition. And then when you consider the fact that literally every cubic inch of the US is soon to be covered by some sort of surveillance camera, it starts to get a little upsetting. I mean, it's, I don't think it's that much of a stretch to be extremely concerned about this type of thing.
Well, and scale makes all the difference with these things. That's been the problem with mass surveillance to begin with, is that you have these sort of notions that were based on a very small, limited scope or scale, based on the scale of what a police officer in the 1970s could do with a warrant on an individual, and then you take that concept, but then change the scale and the scope, and it changes all of the implications. And the same thing goes with having a surveillance camera that looks at the inside of a jewelry store is a different scale and scope to having ubiquitous cameras everywhere that someone could access if they, that someone could centrally access and combine all the information about. I mean, that's the power of Ring in general, is that you have a central company that has access to all of this footage in one way or the other. And so it's very valuable for law enforcement and other people to tap into when they want footage that they otherwise couldn't get. And there's also precedent recently, I don't know if we talked about this last time or not, where there have been cases where government officials who were doing an investigation that would have required a warrant sidestepped it and simply paid for the data from data brokers, so they wouldn't have to go through the trouble of getting a warrant to get the same data.
Yeah, we have talked about that because you don't need it anymore. Who needs a warrant when so much personal information is available for sale? So they just buy it instead of,
Well, there's a couple of interesting angles on this. One is that the new thing for a lot of companies anyway is to have as little data as possible about people, because it's kind of like a toxic asset. A friend of mine calls it the radon gas of corporate computing, and it's too much personal data because suddenly they're exposed. But on the other hand, it is exactly what Kyle's talking about here. There are more avenues, especially at scale, to have access to personal information about people and to identify people. You combine anything with facial recognition, and to me, that's like that's the worst part. I have a corporate client that is doing, it's not facial recognition as much as age verification. This person appears to be over this age or under that age. That's all it does. But it was trained with actual known ages of known people and so forth. And but I started studying it, and the further I got into it, the more I thought the only entities that should recognize a face are other human beings or their pets, and not machines. I think I'm taking more of an absolutist position on it. Like we should not even have machine facial recognition outside of our own devices. Okay, if my device, I look at it, it knows is my face, but that data I know, I have a way of knowing it's auditable. This is a big part of this, is that nobody talks about, that how do you check? Google says, I'm not going to, Petros brought this up earlier, but we're not going to share your information with other parts of the company, and then they go ahead and do it anyway. Or maybe you mentioned it, Kyle, but somebody did. But anyway, you've no way of knowing. I mean, there's no auditing that goes on here. If you're operating a nuclear power plant, they're going to go in and look at paperwork, and they're going to look at machine records. They're going to see whether you're operating this thing well. We don't have anything like that for the giant systems that possess all kinds of information about us. But we need that. But I don't know how to make it happen, but I do think we need something like that, because the manners aren't there yet. And until the manners are there, and there are systems out there that can recognize a gesture from a human being that says, I don't want to be seen. I don't want to show up on that. I don't want you looking inside my life. We're going to be sort of stuck with, kind of the first law of technology, which is what can be done will be done.
Well, and the default is to collect data and to store it, right? I mean, if for instance, we lived in a world where it was 100%, it was always opt-in instead of having to opt out, and we operated under that default, then it would, then you could walk down the street and say, well, unless I've chosen to opt into the system with informed consent, then I'm not too concerned about it. But we know that that's not the case. We know that instead you have to explicitly go to a lot of trouble to try to remove yourself from things where information about you has been incidentally collected just by you being a person in the modern age.
Yeah, the whole opting out thing. I mean, opting out of everything on a one-off basis where you have no record that you actually have opted out. You've kept no record. You don't know what the other party's doing. It's impossible. It's an impossible situation, and we're stuck with that right now.
Did you guys get a notice from Facebook when you log into Facebook? So there's some notice at the top of the application where some people are eligible to get money back, or not, I shouldn't say back,
right,
to get some sort of compensation from Facebook due to a class action lawsuit that was filed against them, and the way that Facebook either used or misused.
Is it for a state or something? Is it?
I don't know. Is it for a state? Because everyone, at least around me here in Illinois, saw this notice. Maybe I should go.
Yeah,
back
there is one for
Yeah,
Illinois.
Doc, you need to fire up the VPN. Visit Facebook from Illinois.
Yeah, and
you can get up. You can get up to $400 from Facebook because of the way they've misused your data and I think facial recognition data specifically.
See, they offer $650 million to settle facial recognition class action. Huh.
And this is recent. This showed up in my Facebook feed about 2 days ago, and my wife's and some of our friends, because we were asking about it. And then shortly thereafter, I saw it reported on CNN or something. I don't remember, one of these news sites.
The irony here is that I go to the USA. I did a search. I go to the USA Today 1, and immediately a popover shows up from Gannett, which owns USA, about selling personal information, and that's because I'm in California, and it's defaulted on. By the way, I have to switch it to off, and they make it unclear what the toggle is. Which way is right? Which way is this and that? And it's powered by OneTrust, which is one of the companies that provides the this a back end for this. And I confirm my choices. I'll hit confirm my choices, and I will. I just took a screenshot, and do I have a record of that? I confirm it's my choice. I confirm my choice. I have no record of that. Where is it? I don't know. It made the banner go away. And is Gannett remembering that? Is OneTrust remembering that? What happened? There's no way to tell. It's bizarre and wrong. But anyway, $650 million, and 3 Illinois residents sued Facebook. So you should go for it, Petros. You're there.
Yeah, I don't know. I want to learn more about it before I do anything, or before I recommend that my wife and I do anything with it, only because I don't know what the gotchas are, right?
Don't click the button.
Well, yeah, see,
that's
that's
the
the thing.
You need to
don't
provide
know.
you need to provide your financial routing information for your bank to Facebook so that they know where to deposit the check. It's no problem.
Obviously.
Yeah, that's not going to happen.
And how far can you trust Facebook? And I mean, of course, the joker in me wants to say, I really like the money, but I don't have a face. So like, can I get it if I don't have a face?
Oh, the facial recognition stuff, though. God, I mean, we could talk so long about that. I don't. Have you seen the things that have been popping up in the last couple of days, talking about the new phrenology is back and
oh, phrenology is back.
Yeah, my favorite quote out of something I read recently. I'm actually looking at it right now. It says, something about racist pseudosciences for the modern surveillance state. I mean, I think that kind of.
What if you actually have horns?
I don't know. I mean, but if you had said to me 5 years ago that this was a concern, that there were companies out there developing facial recognition software to target people based on the shape of their face, to predict who is more likely to commit criminal behavior, I would have assumed you were talking about a screenplay or some sort of
Black Mirror episode or something.
A Black Mirror episode. Yeah. Yes, exactly. And so there's something about the fact that these headlines it doesn't surprise me today. I'm like, oh yeah, that sounds about right. And the current state of the world, what with, COVID and politics and everything, and then these kind of headlines, it's just, do you feel like we're living in the wrong timeline? It's the only thing. I mean,
well, we're living in the past, and this is a good time to correct things, actually. I really think it's very, very early, and whatever, we've had digital technology for several decades, and we're going to have it for millennia, probably, if we continue to have civilization. Now is a good time to correct some of this stuff.
Yeah.
Well, and your point of our living in the past is, in particular in the U.S., as advanced as we think that we are in these cases, if you want to see where everything is going, China, when you talked about before about how, if it can be done, it will be done. There's no semblance of regulation to stop what could be done. And so, if you want a precursor of what it could be like, they have, very state-of-the-art uses of this technology. I mean, all the way from the facial recognition side to, social a social score.
The social
credit score.
Which
right?
was a Black Mirror episode, by the way. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they have that implemented. And even, I mean, while we have, trustworthiness from your face shape, which I can never think of a way that could be abused, but not just for law enforcement, but for job applicants too. A lot of these algorithms they're being marketed. Companies that make these sorts of things are marketing them in two main areas. They're marketing them for law enforcement, and they're marketing them for companies that have, like, large companies that do a lot of hiring. As an initial screen, so you have an algorithm that can screen out applicants for you based on, who traditionally, based on whoever they trained the algorithm on, would be a good worker for the company, and there's already been a lot of research into that to show the inherent biases and that sort of thing. But I mean, the same thing went for a system that would determine whether or not you should have bail, based on not just your face, but based on other attributes of yourself.
Okay, I give up. I just give up. I quit humanity. Oh, that's troubling. Deeply troubling. Do we have any good news this week? Good news.
I was thinking of recognition, and for some reason, the face of a rock star came to my head. So I have to tell you a brief story. And it may be a wrong story, but it's a great story. I went to a barber back when I used to go to barbers when I lived in the Bay Area, and this is when John Lee Hooker, the singer, was still with us, and he sort of famously locally had a house, a little ranch house on a side street, and there were pictures of John Lee Hooker all over the walls of this barber shop, and I said to the barber, "So so you're into John Lee Hooker. He said, oh yeah, no, I cut his hair. I said, where? He comes in. He said, no, I go to his house. And he said, well, actually, a few weeks ago I was there and I went in. He just leaves the front door unlocked, and there was it was a dead guy on the couch, and I'm staring at this guy who's clearly dead. And he said, so I went into. He always cut his hair in his bedroom. He had a special chair he wanted to sit in the bedroom. And I said, Mr. Hooker, there's a dead guy in your living room on the couch. And John Lee Hooker said, no, that's Keith Richards. He always looks like that.
Oh, I was waiting for the punchline. I mean,
that was the punchline.
It was like one.
No, whether it's true or not, it's a credible story, nonetheless.
Oy.
Yeah.
Oy. So I'm feeling very ridiculous today. I feel like I'm gonna have to edit a lot of my ridiculousness, but that's fine.
No, that's fine.
That's all good. But yeah, I mean, okay, so a word that, well, it was the title of our podcast a couple weeks ago, and it's a word that Kyle has repeated a few times, and that is normalization. And that is a thing that is happening. Like, I no longer find insane headlines or just insane data, headline aside, media bias or whatever aside, completely. I no longer find bizarre information to be bizarre because, it's getting, I'm feeling a little punch drunk from weird news. And anyway, so I feel like the only logical response is to laugh at it, or else we'll all go crazy.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. Are y'all feeling the same way, that it's just like, oh, well, what crazy thing are we going to read this week about technology?
Well, what's normal, right? I mean, so
it's all fear mongering, right? You ratchet up the fear. People are going to think that they're going to need this. They're going to need this, camera, this drone, this something, because there's a fear out there, fear of maybe somebody breaking into your home or causing harm to your family or something. So long as that fear is there, and so long as they being these companies developing this technology, harvesting your data, so long as they use security as an excuse, I mean, it's going to be more and more normalized, is my concern.
That's an interesting point, because the second you said fear mongering, I imagine myself thinking, oh, well, maybe I've become hypersensitive in the other way. Like, I assume that now, every device that comes out is potentially very harmful. But, but I think that most people view it the other way, is that the world is so scary that we need these things. Whereas I'm looking at like, oh God, what camera is going to be in my house? I mean, obviously none are going to be in my house because I'm not going to make that choice. But yeah, so that's an interesting point that you make.
That's it.
That's it. It was over. Okay.
I'll be here all week. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah. The silence triggers the whatever.
Oh, one thing that we could talk about next at a different time would be that this Google case where a previous employee, or I guess technically an existing employee, has a lawsuit with them. And I think that the attorney realized, wait, we're using Google Docs and Gmail to coordinate our defense, or I'm sorry, not our defense, but this lawsuit. And Google could legally view that information if they wanted to, because they're allowed to do that to quote unquote protect Google.
Oh, wow! So there goes the privilege. That
is interesting.
Huh.
Yeah, and so what happened was in one of the terms and conditions, of the many things that you click through and don't read, one of them is that Google is allowed to access your data. While it typically wouldn't, it's allowed to protect Google, whatever that means. And then, so in this lawsuit, the attorney filed a motion they want Google to answer the question, what does that mean in this case? Could you, for instance, look at our correspondence, or the judge's information that's shared with the judge outside that's not supposed to be shared with you? Could you access it if it's using a Google service? What does it mean to protect Google? And the answer hasn't come out yet. The motion was just filed. So it'll be interesting to see what happens out of that.
That is interesting.
Hmm.
Well,
I wonder
stay tuned. We need to invite some lawyers on again.
I wonder if
Maybe not. I don't know.
so. The GDPR has these 6 provisions. I forget what the right word is, but reasons that a company might collect personal data on somebody. One of them is consent, of course. That's why we get those consent notices. Another one is called legitimate interest, which is I have a legitimate interest in this information. But that's also an interesting defense of anything. I mean, so Google could say, I have a legitimate interest in self-preservation. So anything that we think might threaten us, which could be anything, becomes a blanket okay to whatever. I'm just thinking out loud here. But legitimate interest is, and oh, by the way, legitimate interest kind of got lobbied into the law by the, as I understand it anyway, by the, by the bigs, by Google and the rest of them, that because they want to be able to continue advertising. That was a legitimate interest, but there are many other things that could be considered legitimate, I suppose. So here, this might be relevant. I was once sitting on a plane next to a guy who turned out to be a college basketball ref. And I said, how do you make judgment calls on fouls? People are always complaining, that wasn't really a foul, that was a foul. He said, we don't call fouls just because somebody's violated a rule. We want to keep the game under control. You just want to make sure the game doesn't get out of control. Because if it's out of control, everybody's just beating the crap out of each other. And so that's where the judgment comes in. And I thought, I'm thinking the relevance here is that what the regulators want to be able to do, the data protection authorities, for example, in Europe, is keep the game under control. It's not at all under control. And the refs, there's too much bad behavior for the refs to even begin to deal with. But it's an interesting way to look at it, right? You want to keep things under control. Depends on who you are.
That's a good parting sentiment there.
That's our job here. We're keeping things under control.
Keeping it under control. We're trying. We're sure trying.
We're the flaw enforcement agency.
We haven't really talked about the movie that everyone's talking about, The Social Dilemma on Netflix. We talked about it a little bit. We haven't talked about it a lot, but I think, I don't know. I mean,
I still haven't seen it. So
you should watch it.
It's good. It's
entertaining.
It's a good watch.
I have some issues with it.
Tristan Harris, who stars in it, basically, it's kind of, somebody called it an infomercial for him. I know him, not so hugely well, but I do know him. And my problem with it is that there are 2 problems. One is it's mostly is a bunch of white guys. And
exactly.
That's one thing. The other thing is that it entirely busts Google and Facebook especially, right? And not all the other perpetrators out there. I mean, every website you go to, Google is spying on you. You know that Facebook's spying on you. You know they have these capacities. You know that they're playing confirmation bias games with you at all times, and as ways to angle you toward advertising. And but you don't know that when you go to the Wall Street Journal or to the Smithsonian Magazine, that your data about you is being leaked out to the entire world, and for many, many parties unknown, and they didn't examine that because that's a harder thing to examine. Yeah. It's actually more complex, much more complex, because there are many more players in it, and it's changing constantly. But then again, I'm a broken record on this, and I've got in an audience of none for most of it. So, but I want to bring it up.
Well, there's also, there's so many people in Silicon Valley, at least, where they have this sort of this post-profit crisis of conscience. After they're out of the game,
right? Yeah. I've got my billion, and now I can think. Yeah.
Like now, wow, I did some really awful stuff to get this billion. I feel guilty now. Oh, and I'm also now raising a family, And I know that, and so therefore, so you have a lot of execs that their kids basically don't use computers and aren't allowed to use computers because they're familiar with how they're going to be exploited because they help build that machine. And they have the crisis of conscience after the fact, which is always a convenient place to have it,
And being aware of it isn't necessarily all that helpful. Like, I'm perfectly aware that, the more I go down the rabbit hole of freaking out about facial recognition, the more of it I'm going to see. And then it's going to, impact my outlook on certain things. But it, the awareness doesn't change anything. It's, I can not use the internet, but that doesn't seem like appealing. And there are obviously ways that we have talked about in the past to sort of mitigate some of that. But something that Doc said earlier is really kind of what resonated with me here. And I have a little bit of a cynical attitude sometimes, but I was watching
what attitude?
Cynical, a little bit.
Oh, cynical, yeah.
Yeah. And I was watching it and thinking, well, but you guys are the ones who got us into this. Like, older now, I guess, but young white dudes, you guys got us into this. Maybe we should consider a broader perspective on how to get us out. But maybe that's the feminist in me, but I didn't see nearly enough women there.
Or at least, someone who was on the inside and helped build a thing and their conscience wasn't triggered by it enough to do anything about it while they were in a position to do something about it. Only after the fact isn't as helpful. What we need are people within, if you're going to be in the machine, you're in the machine, stopping it from being unethical. I mean, I think there have been far more strides internally in both Facebook and Google toward improving the situation for everybody by the fact that they have internal employees that are staging, demonstrations and threatening to walk out, and in some cases quitting over, policy decisions like the Project Dragonfly, for instance. That's the first one that comes to mind, where it changed internal policy and it was kept secret internally for a reason. And then when it finally got out internally, it caused this whole thing. And I think more of that, hiring people with ethics who have principles, not opinions, not self-serving opinions on things, but actual principles that, which I define as something that you keep, an ideal that you keep, even if it costs you something, even if it's not advantageous to yourself. It's very easy to talk about the damages that a lot of these companies have to your privacy when you're no longer reliant on them. But it's a different thing, when you are, of course. And so we're seeing more principled people enter the workforce over the last decade or so. That I guess if we're going to end on a positive note, the positive note that I have is that a lot of people care about more about what they do for a living now as far as the impact on the world, and that's leaking into these companies in ways that it didn't before, where you're seeing more companies focus on social good or the impact that their company's making on the world because their employees are demanding it. It's not enough to just pay your bills.
Yeah, I agree. You do see so much more of that. It's such a tough thing to measure, though, isn't it? Like, how
actually, I've noticed that as well, and I see it more with the younger generations than I do with the older. It's just what I've been observing. Back when I was, they're not my employer anymore, but back when I was with IBM, it was the younger engineers that were essentially directing, what was morally good and not so morally good with some of the decisions or directions that various sectors of the company were taking.
Well, in the words of the great Ian Malcolm, it's, I think, because you have a cycle. So early in technology, you had people. What was it? The quote from Jurassic Park. We were so preoccupied with whether or not they could that they didn't stop to think if they should. I love that line.
I thought it was you are what eats you.
Well, there's that too. But I think earlier on, I think people have that attitude. I think when you go into developing something new, that's not an uncommon perspective. And then you find out how again unforeseen consequences that I always like to mention. But I think I can see what you're saying about a younger perspective or younger engineers having a slightly different take on it. But I think it's important to include perspectives from all age groups. I think that people who were around, before all of this became normalized have, an important view on it. I think it's the rest of us, I don't think, can see past what we are used to at this point. I mean, maybe some of us can, and that's, overly broad statement, but I think the important takeaway there is to make sure you're listening to as many people as you can.
Yeah. So listen again next week.
Yeah. And on that note, listen to us. Thanks, everyone. Email us at info@realitytocast.com if you have any feedback.